Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mikolas. Pawel Miechowski here from 11-bit Studios. This is gonna be a speech in very human, so to speak, sense. So it's not gonna be about design nor programming. I have no clue about programming. This guy does. He's our lead tech programmer. And so let's keep thinking about human sense of this speech, and I'm gonna tell you a little about how we approach the communication behind the game to make it, in the end, even beyond our control, a political phenomenon. So it's gonna be a little from a political point of view, or how important people, very important in some cases, have noticed the game. Click. Yeah, so we are 11-bit. You may know us as the guys who have created Frostpunk or This War of Mine, but we are also a publisher behind titles such as Moonlighter, Children of Morta, and actually more, working on now Frostpunk 2, The Altars, one unannounced project, and 5 projects in the publishing division. If you haven't seen This War of Mine, shortly this is our description from Steam. In this game you do not play as an allied soldier, rather a group of civilians trying to survive in a besieged city, struggling with lack of food, medicine, constant danger from snipers and hostile scavengers. The game provides an experience of war seen from entirely new angle. And pretty much this description says what the game is about. And to give you some bigger picture, our budget for the development was around 700,000 bucks. Not a small game, not a AA in, let's say, nowadays conditions, not a AAA at all. By this time, the game sold more than 7 million units. Actually, a huge chunk was sold this year in relation to this event for Ukraine that I'm going to tell you a little bit later. And the revenue crossed 30 million bucks. And the game was released in 2014 and it's still selling. And this is amazing, but it is. Imagine 8 years of so-called long tail of sales. So these are the numbers. But this speech is not about money, it's about the impact. These are the media I specifically shown because when we have released the game, it took the mainstream in a storming way, so to speak, because this game was covered by all mainstream media that you can really think of, including GDS, or name any mainstream media in Czech Republic, they covered the game. Name any mainstream media in Germany, they covered the game. Spiegel, Die Welt, Bild, every single one of them. The Guardian, The Telegraph, Daily Mirror, in US, Washington Post, New York Times, every single one of them. And that's weird because it's not Call of Duty, it's not Assassin's Creed, it was a small thing from Poland, which back then I guess could have been perceived by Americans as a, some country next to Russia, which coincidentally is in NATO, but still there is such. So how could that happen? I mean, is it just good luck, or is it some form of our understanding of spreading the message around the game and behind the game? So can impact be calculated? I certainly think that it can be calculated if you're, of course, risky and brave enough. And for that, you need timing. What does that mean? That if you want to create a game that is talking specifically about some peculiar or poignant matter, speaking about your reality, political, military, scientifical, you need a good timing, because there are times where people are more or less interested in certain subjects rather than the others. And did we have a good timing? Yes, we did. Over the years, the games about war were only the ones presented the war from soldiers' point of view. Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, Arma, well, name any. And the market was already saturated with such titles, so we could have been calculating that there could be an antidote to it, such as this War of Mine. And we did, and luckily we had a ton of commentary across mainstream media, gaming mainstream as well, like GameSpot, IGN, and others, telling that we need this game. We finally need this game. There's something else, finally. So, well, timing is the key. The message tailored behind it was also specifically tailored. I can give you a very interesting example. Back then, around 10 years ago, when we have been started the development of this game, we were thinking that we are not that young anymore. Most of us are 30, 40 something. We have 50 something plus year-old members of the team, and we were looking at games as toys, and we kind of got bored with those toys, if you know what I mean. We were looking for something more, and to do that, we were looking at film industry. In film industry, you have comedies such as Naked Gun or Hot Shots, you know, very stupid and yet very funny comedies that you watch for entertainment, but for a reason, you also watch movies such as The Pianist or The Private Ryan or Godfather, or lately, to give you an example, The Power of the Dog with Benedict Cumberbatch. I really can't pronounce it properly. It's a masterpiece. I heavily recommend watching that film. It's on Netflix. My point is, sometimes you watch different kind of stories because there's entertainment and there's catharsis. And calculating that, we thought that games could be such. And we find an article by some anonymous lady on some blog or forum, I can't remember, American one, and she was, her point was that she is not playing games because games are for kids or for her husband and they're playing wizards and killing dragons, or the point is she felt she cannot empathize with anything that is happening in games. Games are for you know, big boys or big girls. There is no true, deeper meaning that she could connect to or relate to or in the end empathize with. And we were thinking, this is what we actually demand from games ourselves. And this kind of thinking were behind the creation of this War of Mine. And such message was spread around the game. I was telling the journalists that I don't really care if the game is fun, I only care if it is engaging and brutal enough, emotionally brutal. I don't mean gore, I mean emotional brutality. Brutal enough to picture civilian perspective of war, so it would be striking enough to talk to the audience, that the game would be striking enough. And I think it worked because when we had the game at the very first show in Boston on PAX East, we had people who came there with their kids to play games, and they told us that this game is the first that they got interested in because they are here to play games with their kids, but they found something for themselves. And people like ourselves, 30 plus something year olds. So the message tailored around the game can be impactful, of course, if it stays true to the game itself. This relates to the next point, which is target audience. Of course, we knew that the game is not gonna be for teenagers. It's got an age rating for adult gamers anyway, because of some brutal scenes it's got. But the point was that we knew that the mature character of the game would be understandable for rather older gamers, 25, 30, 35, 40-year-olds. So we knew what is the target audience. By coincidence or not, such audience are also journalists for big media. Like, you don't rather have young students writing for New York Times. You rather have, you know, experienced writers with a background. And they were our audience. And in the end, we had luck because the timing was also good in relation to what I told you before. But anyway, yeah, the impact can be calculated to some extent, and we were thinking that way. What is good luck? Good luck is that we did not expect how strongly it would resonate, because with fairly short and low on resources PR campaign, we're able to reach media all around the world, including BBC, ABC, The Guardian, Washington Post, and so on and so on. This is the picture, the very first one that we have presented from the game as a direct screenshot from the game, and by some other developers in Poland, actually quite popular one, so I'm not gonna tell you which one, maybe later when we have a beer. He was criticizing this screenshot as cheap emotionally, as, you know, trying to squeeze tears out of eyes of the audience, while in fact this was exactly what we wanted to do, to tell to people, you're gonna have a brutal game when it comes to emotions you will face, the emotional toll in the game. And this is words taken from actual reviews from Washington Post. One could easily imagine it being incorporated into the classroom to function as an interactive supplement alongside books like All Quiet on the Western Front, or from French Le Monde. It's not for you if you hate having to make hard choices. So it resonated very well among not only this non-gaming mature audience, but also journalists who are actually such people. They don't usually play games, but they found something that was true enough for them, true as a, you know, game capable of speaking about reality. So as much as we had a lot of good luck with that game, the impact was somewhat calculated to achieve the effect we wanted to achieve. And then some weird things happen. Do you know what is Atlantic Council? So it's a think tank, mostly located, most of the members are located on the west coast of United States. It's a think tank with such members as Condoleezza Rice, so Secretary of State during, as far as I remember, Clinton presidency. Long story short, very powerful people. And one day I was sitting in the office working on some, you know, PR bullshit, and I got a call from New York, from a guy, I can't remember his name, saying he's a senior fellow of the Atlantic Council. And I was like, wow. I knew what that was because history and geopolitics is my, you know, kind of hobby, reading about it. But then still, a guy from Atlantic Council is calling us, and he wanted to talk about the game. And it's a think tank that deals with politics, military issues, you know, NATO, very important things from our perspective. And suddenly such guy calls me, he found my number somehow, and asks me about the game. And we just had a conversation, and he was very interested, actually, in who we are. Not as much about as about the game, because he knew the game from media, such as New York Times, etc. but he was interested in who we are as people. Because somehow they were thinking that we calculated this game to be such impactful, that it's not only games as art, as we want to make, most of us, or games as business that we all make because we make a living out of producing and selling games, but he wanted to learn who we were, to find out what was our, intent to make such an impact. And that was pretty weird. I didn't have any deeper thoughts behind that, besides the fact of being shocked that the guy from Atlantic Council was calling me. But they wanted to learn who we are, because the game was impactful not only across the mainstream, but also among the people who don't really play games on regular basis, such as that lady who wrote this blog post that I told you earlier, that she's not interested in playing games because games are shallow and doesn't offer deep emotions. So somehow we've made such a game, and it resonated so deeply that quite powerful organizations took us on their radar and called me to talk. And then comes Wilton Park. That's the explanation taken from Wikipedia. It's a UK agency. I think formally it is funded by UK and entire Commonwealth, so Canada, Australia, and all the countries that are in the Commonwealth. And they invited me for their summit in United States. And this one, Wilton Park, has been founded by Winston Churchill right after the war to discuss international policies. It's let's call it a forum to exchange thoughts about strategic policies, military policies, and so on, in relation mostly to Anglo-Saxon or wider Western world. And here comes, and I went to that meeting in America, and here we have some guy from Poland, with, I didn't even have clothes like those guys in super expensive suits. So here comes a PR guy / developer from Poland, and there we have people from governments. On that meeting, there were members of British government, there were board members of huge Hollywood production companies such as Columbia or Paramount. Name the biggest Hollywood companies. The CEOs of those companies were there, plus very high-ranking military officers from different NATO armies, and some dude from Poland who was behind one of the people behind this war of mine. By the way, the other one sits there. and that was weird. And what they wanted, I was thinking a lot why they did that, why important people are inviting, a regular dude for their meetings. And in the different discussions, I figured out that they were thinking that such a game would have been made with a specific policy in mind. I don't really recall any game developer who would have a policy to create stuff. We make games because we want to make money, because we have families and we need to live, and because we want to create cool stuff, art, music, design, tell really interesting stories in the game's narrative. But for some reason, they were thinking that we had a policy behind this war of mine. On a side note, this was related to our mission. This is a complete side note, something I would advise you to think of. What is your team's mission? The mission is not something super serious. There's one obvious mission, making games because we make a living out of selling games, but the mission could be, let's create the best football manager in the world. And to give you an example, Sports Interactive, the British team is doing exactly that. That's their mission, right? They have really precise mission of what they want to make and deliver, and they are doing it. And our mission, we call it meaningful entertainment, and long story short, those are games that provoke thinking. And This War of Mine is a perfect example. Frostpunk is another good one. So through different game mechanics, we want to put players in against moral dilemmas and provoke them to thinking, right? So that's our mission. That's a side note. I just wanted to tell you. Going back to the point, those very powerful people wanted to learn our policy, and because there is no policy, my summary of this slide would be that you can make such an impact without truly even control, because, like I said, there was a lot of good luck with This War of Mine, but impactful enough that super important people wanted to learn what was our intent behind creation of the game. While we calculated the message, we did not surely realize the message would be so widely spread. Maybe not powerful message, but surely widely spread. And since I'm a PR guy, so I'm gonna tell you we are sponsoring beer tonight at the party, so I invite you to come and have a beer. I would be happy to talk more and tell you more details about it, because it's a quite interesting story, but no time for going into details now. Anyway, there was no policy, but somewhat calculated, impactful message. And then we are a few years later, it's 2017, and we were thinking how successfully we managed to realize our mission in creating meaningful entertainment, and we are already convinced enough that games can be mature form of storytelling, if not the art. Some people would surely tell you that games are toys. You just do pew, 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 or play a dragon or whatever. I dare to say that games are art, and I truly believe it. Anyway, it's 2017, and since This War of Mine was still really popular and selling, and we had games such as That Dragon Cancer or Papers, Please, or we could probably name much more. The games that speak to people's empathy, still for some people, the games are only toys, and I think a lot of people still are thinking that way, that these are just digital toys. And because of that, the games do not deserve to be something more than that. While based on this, games are not allowed to go beyond being toys. And why am I telling this? Because I truly believe that there's a paradigm of education, right? And paradigm of education says that education is based on literature, books, access to resources, teachers, everything that builds paradigm of education, and there's a paradigm of games. And it says that games are for fun or entertainment. And yeah, sure they are. They can even be educational, because for years you've been using games for physics or to teach programming or logical thinking, so-called edutainment. And then, yeah, but what if we take games and use them to teach humanities, like philosophy? And then there comes this. I'm pretty sure you know it very well, and I've been following this project since the very beginning, and it's a Czech project, but then I learned that the game created by, correct me if I'm wrong, but by the Karlov University, specifically to teach history. And that was a perfect example of how a game can break this false paradigm of games, that a game can actually teach not only classics, logical sciences such as physics, maths, and so on, but also humanities such as history. So I started to purposely use Attentat 1942 as an example of a game made specifically to teach history. And I'm gonna refer to these Polish officials later, but what I did is that I started to use this specific game to convince Polish officials that a game can be actually used to teach history. Now a little word about politicians. I think politicians are everywhere pretty much the same. Well, maybe except Russia, but pretty much the same. That, you know, they are reactive. In game development, people must be active. They need to think about unique ideas, because a unique idea behind the game is often one of the most important things they have in a game, while politicians are often reactive. They see something's happening and they react to it, which is bad, but that's what they are, and let's live with that fact. My point is that they are reactive. So when I was presenting Attentat to them, and I was telling that, look, in Czech Republic, they are using a game to teach history, they were not replying in such a way, but I knew that in their brain it was like, oh, Czech people have something we don't. Ooh, we need to react. We need to react. So it was a good, you know, leverage to kind of use this fact. By the way, we do have even physical copy of Attentat, which is cool. And anyway, I'm gonna go to Polish officials later, but back then the idea started to emerge. It took some time to finally be born between us as developers and officials in Poland, or administrations, people from the Ministry of Education, that this War of Mine is a game with a huge potential to be used in education, specifically ethics, Polish language, and philosophy. And I had a meeting one after another, and now it would be probably like 100 meetings with those officials and administration people from the ministry about our game and others' games as well, because Attentat was quite oftenly used by myself as an example, that games can be perfect tools for education. And many were like, you know, people with concrete mind, but by concrete I mean, you know, stone mind, without imagination, like, because for them games are just, you know, shooters and killing and explosions and stuff like that, nothing beyond that. So I found a quote in a program book for high school ethic lessons in Poland by Dr. Jacek Friedrich, and it's a super clever quote, because it says, let me read it out loud, because maybe you don't see in the back. Thinking is generally regarded as a complex cognitive process well captured by the metaphor of the game between theorizing and mental simulations. By expressing the essence of thinking in this way, moral thinking can be treated as an interaction taking place in the mind between concepts, in particular moral concepts, and their assemblies, cognitive schemes, statements, including value judgments and ethical questions, and theories, including ethical theories, and mental simulations of states of affairs that are considered morally relevant. It's pretty much complicated, but the point is, thinking is generally regarded as a complex cognitive process well captured by the metaphor of the game between theorizing and mental simulations. It perfectly says that what we are doing, games, are tools to learn thinking. And that's a perfect quote. I think it's also good for all of us working in games industry to think that in a game you can create any kind of moral experiment and put player in a situation to be in this experiment by asking simple questions. What if? Like, you create an environment, put player inside, make him or her a choice to be available choice to choose A or B, and ask what if. And then you can put any kind of moral dilemma in front of the player. This is quite a interesting, I think, observation. Anyway, in a simplification, this means that a game can be actually a perfect tool to teach humanities. And by the English dictionary, humanities, branches of knowledge such as philosophy, literature, and art that are concerned with human thought and culture. And this line specifically, this one breaks the false paradigm of games. And what I truly believe, and Attentat is the example, and this War of Mine is now such an example, that games can be perfect tools for education. And now going back to the politicians, yeah, that's another thing, kind of forgot this slide. There's another paradigm of education, especially in Poland. I am not sure how it looks like in your country or other countries that you guys represent. But in Poland, there's the famous line, what author had in mind? Like, it's a, immortal, so to speak, question that teachers ask students after they had read a book, what author had in mind? I mean, I sometimes I don't know what author had in mind, but in games, the breaking the paradigm is perfect because you can put the player in front of many choices that can be made in a game. Then the player tailors his own story until the end of the game, and in the end, he or she can say, what I was thinking, not what the author was thinking, but what I was thinking. That's a perfect change of the paradigm. But anyway, going back to politicians, using the perfect tool of Attentat was one thing to leverage their mind, so they are not jealous that in Czech Republic something's happening and in Poland not, and it worked. I met a ton of people on different levels when working with administration and officials to push this process of this War of Mine being an educational tool forward. And for example, I met people responsible for creation educational programs for high school for every single województwo. Województwo is like, I think, in Czech Republic and okres, so like, a land. We have 16 of them. Warsaw is capital of Województwo Mazowieckie. And one of those people, it was a lady, she said that she can't imagine a game being educational tool because all games are brutal. And one guy from the other województwo, he said, yeah, but chess is a game and it's not really that brutal. And then she said some other really stupid argument, and he replied with, you know what, if you keep thinking that way, we may say that, now pardon my language, and he was more gentle than I am, but he said that all films are about fucking and sex because this is porn, and most of the films on the planet are porn. So he kind of laughed at her because games surely are different, right? There are shooter games, and to be honest, I like them. But that doesn't mean all games are that, like, I don't know, Manhunt or name any other game you consider brutal. The point is, games can be perfect tool for an education. But it was really hard to convince them and change the thinking of paradigm. And Attentat was used as an example by myself. Oregon Trail was used by myself, and I was really stubborn. And it took few years for me to go, you know, we have this saying in Poland, od Annasza do Kajfasza, like Jesus was sent from one judge to another in Bible and achieved nothing in the end. And I felt like that situation, like being sent from one administration office to another, and everybody was like, this is not us, you need to ask someone else. But I was stubborn, and I did that. And in the end, after years, it was during the presidential campaign, so they need to make some extra points, but we used this fact to our advantage, and Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki, made a press conference at our office and officially announced that this war of mine would become school reading in Poland. And when the idea was born initially, somewhere around 2017, I had no idea that pushing dominoes, I would be able somehow to talk to the representatives of the Prime Minister, because he heard about the idea and he kind of was convinced that we should, in Poland, not we as 11-bit, but we as a nation, that we should do it and create a game as an official school reading for high schools, to be precise, because the game it has an age rating 18+, so we're talking about the last class of high school and the last 2 classes of technical high schools in Poland. And this is funny. So, as you know, in Frostpunk, you can introduce new laws, and it's a meme from our office. Yeah, this is it. And the guy is, you know, we laugh often at the Prime Minister because he likes to introduce, you know, new tax every year, so it was perfect. But anyway, it finally made it until, not there yet, but the process is over, and it's gonna be ended by this end of this year, by 2022, that this war of mine will land on the list of official, it's called in Polish, works of culture that can be used in schools, high schools, for ethics, Polish language, and philosophy. And all along the way, I met irrational aversion. The formal procedures were a shocking pain in the ass. But yeah, like I said, I was stubborn. 11-bit has worked with Warsaw foundation called Foundation for Big Histories. That would be more or less the translation. This foundation works to create interactive educational tools. So games fit to this very, very well. And with the help of this foundation, we made a special program with Polish teachers, mostly from Warsaw, who took the game and experimentally used it as a tool in their lessons. And based on this, we created scenarios of lessons that are now formally recommended by the Ministry of Education for high schools in Poland. Plus, Poznań University of Adam Mickiewicz helped a lot, because in their institute dedicated for interactive educational tools, they helped. It's a bad translation, but they have an institute responsible for creation of interactive tools for education. They also create scenarios for lessons based specifically on this War of Mine. As a curiosity, I can tell you that one of the biggest problems I have seen is the generation gap. What I mean by that is that teachers who are, let's say, 50-something year old, they are not really so much into computers. Of course, they use them, but it's not natural for them. They haven't been playing games for ages or using it for whatever kind of work, and they are really against such idea, opposite to young teachers, 30-something, 20-something, for whom the games are natural, but there is a gap between them, and this is a problem. But by the way, this War of Mine is not an obligatory school reading. It's non-obligatory. So only for teachers and students who want to use it, they are not forced to read it or play it or whatever. And yeah, in the end, it made it to this list, and it's for ethics, Polish language, and civics. But I am making this kind of big sub-point about education, while this lecture was supposed to be about politics. So we're landing in 2022, and there comes the February 24. Just like in Czech Republic, in Poland, we have a lot of Ukrainian people as well. We live with them, like, we perceive them as, our guys, right? So that was a massive, shocking day. And on this very event day, we got an email from one girl from, I can't remember the city, in the east of Ukraine. And she wrote that she's been a big fan of this War of Mine, and now she's terrified because she's having the game in her life. And I kind of recall that all the pictures we have made for the game, the photos, are stuff that is happening in people's life. So we've made a statement, a very bold statement about Russian military forces invading Ukraine, and we've decided just like that. And to be fair for every single team member, our CEO and my friend, Przemek, he spoke to every team member, and we are 200-something, close to 240 now, quite a big team. So imagine our CEO spoke to entire team to ask if they are okay with doing something like that, with spreading a very bold statement that we are against the Russian invasion, and that we would be gathering money to help Ukraine by selling all of this War of Mine DLCs, all platforms, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PC, you name it, and donate all the money from 1 week to Ukraine. And actually that was the most popular tweet I have ever written. We've got millions of impressions, and I'm not boasting. I don't really care. I just want to tell you how popular was that, how it moved people. We didn't want to wait. We needed to act. Why the CEO was asking the entire team? We have Ukrainians in our team, and we have Russians in our team. So both needed to accept that and felt good and responsible with what we were doing. But 100%, everyone in the team was behind it and said, let's fucking do it. And in a week, we have gathered $850,000. That's more than the entire original budget of the game, including marketing, in 1 week. And we made a huge discount to make it accessible for all of people all over the world. So it was like something like 500,000 units of the game in a week that amounted to this sum. and we decided to donate it to the Ukrainian Red Cross. And here comes another political story, because it's a dirty one. Because when the war broke out, we gathered the money. I was responsible for organizing this money transfer to Ukrainian Red Cross. And this was one of the most stressful things in my life. Not because about the amount, although it's huge, but because there's war in other country, computers are working, internet is working, but in a messy way. There's a fog of war, and then you decided to transfer almost $1 million, but you have no idea where it can land. So I even called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to ask if they can help me and research the bank accounts, if they are safe, and so on and so on. And they helped me, and indeed they were the safe bank accounts, so we wired the money. But here comes the dirty story. There were a representative, even, I'm not sure, but maybe the chief of the International Red Cross, I think a guy from Switzerland, who came to Russia in these days and made a statement that it's good that Russians are organizing refugee camps. You know what are Russian refugee camps? They are good because they are helping the people who are fleeing war in Ukraine. Ukrainians were mad at it, like completely mad. As mad as the guys from Ukrainian Red Cross were asking me that if I am asked, I should be responding that they have nothing to do with the International Red Cross, which you should remember. Like Czech Red Cross has nothing to do, like what is common is the symbol, but Polish Red Cross is different organization, different purpose, different funding, international as well, Ukrainian as well, name any other. And they were mad about it. But luckily, they got the money from us. International help towards Ukraine is huge. You know it very well. So our help was just a drop in the ocean, but still, thanks to it, they were able to organize more medical treatments, even stuff as fuel for the trucks they are using to deliver necessary help, and so on and so on. But in the end, what I wanted to say is that the political story behind this war of mine is mind-blowing, even to an extent that Red Cross is somehow involved in the story because we wanted to help, but they are guys who might be shady. I'm talking about the guy from International Red Cross. So the Ukrainians are suggesting me to rather stay away from it. And everything began with our folks, including me, trying to think how to make a game that is impactful and how to tailor impactful message behind the game. And we did it to the extent that it got attention from huge politicians on this planet. And I guess this is it. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Do you have any questions?
Hello. I'm sorry for taking 1 minute because I don't actually have a question, but I represent a Ukrainian game developer that moved to Czech Republic. We moved a lot of people with families, and it was quite hard. And we saw the announcement that 11-bit Studio did when it happens, and we want to say that a lot of thanks to what you did, and it was very important to everyone who saw this support, and it really helps a lot. Yeah, thank you for what you did and doing now. Thank you.
You guys are defending us with blood. So thank you. Okay, we don't have any?
Thank you. Hello. I have a question sort of from the, I guess, the political angle. Do you think those sort of think tank guys that you know, sort of interacted with, do you think they could be thinking of not just your game, but the games as like sort of like they're in the business of changing people's mind? And do you think there's like a risk of using games or them using games as like a, you know, basically like another form of propaganda or like having an agenda, like a political agenda in some way in the future?
Yes, I do think so, because games are culture and culture can impact people for sure. So as a creator, there is responsibility put on us to rather open minds rather than lock them, or moralize, if you know what I mean. Because making people ask questions or even ask themselves, at least in my subjective view, is progressive in a good way. While moralizing on or you know, forcing to a specific way of thinking is a kind of, you know, locking options, if I am putting myself clear. And maybe the agenda is not set in stone or written in notes, but listening to those guys, I had an impression that at least the American folks had, how to say it, to put it clear, a need to promote specific vision of America. So always put it in a good light. Even if there's a bad side, you can, you know, create a story in such a way in movies that in the end, America stands as a, you know, powerful, untouchable empire, which in fact it is, but soft power is a very strong power if used in a coherent way over many, many, many years. The perfect example, in Poland, we are deeply in love with American culture. I can surely tell you that. That means music, films, games, comic books, you know, Marvel, that kind of stuff. I can really tell you, like 30 years ago, and I'm old enough, American culture was, you know, something you could scratch through a glass door, so to speak. Just look at it, right? Now we're full of it. We even have Halloween, something that did not exist 25 years ago. So we're in love. That's soft power. And thanks to this, thanks to such a, of course, soft power has many fields you can use, many. But culture is surely one of them, and pop culture specifically. And thanks to positive image of another country spread in the pop culture, you even make business in a different way. Because when you have an image of a cool country, you're more willing to make business with cool people rather than with those whom you don't like because you have a negative image, right? So soft power can be powerful, but if of course soft power works on many other fields. So if there is an agenda, creation of soft power is such an agenda because I have seen those guys discussing it. So yeah, it's a thing. Does it work on many different levels? Perhaps. That's a beer discussion, you know, if you know what I mean.
Hello, I just wanted to ask you, how did you go about the research of the technicalities of life in the war zone to create such an impactful experience?
You know, that's actually, if you think about it, it's really easy because war is thrilling and everything that is thrilling brings people attention. So there are museums, there's ton of movies, there are online museums, plus we're from Poland, so as much as any other Central Europe country, we have been heavily devastated in the 20th century. So every Polish guy and girl has family members who know a lot of war stories. Plus, there are books about it. Plus, the great example I could recommend is Fama. It's an online museum of the siege of Sarajevo from the Bosnian War, where there are literally hundreds of video interviews with regular people who survived the siege, firefighters, teachers, regular people, and they were telling their stories from the siege of Sarajevo. Plus, we are from Warsaw. Warsaw was heavily destroyed in '44, so a lot of us has family stories from those times. So if you think about it, it's easy to find those stories. But please keep in mind that we're not looking for specific stories as scenarios that A leads to B, B leads to C. We were looking for stories of what is the emotional image of war in people's minds, and we tried to capture that. To give you an example, Emir is a guy who worked with us on This War of Mine as our bank of information, so to speak. Emir was a small kid when the war broke out in Sarajevo, and he escaped with his brother and his mother, and they escaped the city from the siege. But what Emir told, what is my point? Emir told that, war is boring. And we were like, what do you mean? War is boring. I was locked in a basement for a month and I couldn't do anything and play outside. War is boring. So such stories also happen, but it's very picturesque, if you know what I mean. So we also try to paint that boredom, that sometimes nothing's happening and you're just hidden and waiting for things to happen, right? So we rather try to find emotions, but not specific events that happen in war.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for the lecture. And my question is that while this War of Mine is very emotionally impactful and it promotes compassion very well, do you think you went about designing the game in a way it might actually help people in the current events in Ukraine survive in a city under siege?
I wouldn't say so, because this game is sometimes quite brutal and you just lose it and can't make it to the end of war. What we wanted to achieve was to create an environment in which you can empathize with people in war. I don't think it can serve as a guide, if that's what you ask for, because it often ends badly. And I don't have answer to that, but lately we've been asked, because now we have a lot of Ukrainian kids in our schools, and we've been asked if they also should play our game. I don't know. Because the game was so popular, we've got a ton of feedback, and some people were saying it helped me to clear out of trauma, while some said, I don't want to touch it because of the trauma. So people handle with trauma in different way, and I don't think there is a perfect answer to that. And because of that, the game would not work as any guide or tool to cope with trauma. It could, but maybe harmful as well. So it's a psychological question. I don't feel strong enough in that field to go deeper. Still, because it's just a game.
Hi. Chciałbym podziękować panu za wsparcie Ukrainy swoją drogą. Sorry for Polish. And actually my next question is, as a pioneer of such like touching and games which are having very rough emotional background, are you planning like to keep on moving in such direction in the terms of projects or something else?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, but within our field of expertise that we call meaningful entertainment. So Frostpunk 2 is a further extension of the experiment that we set up in the first Frostpunk. So what do you do with people when you are in power and you need to survive? Frostpunk 2 is a further expansion of this experiment. I would even say a lot further. The Alters is a game, it's not that serious as this War of Mine was. That's another project we're working on. And The Alters is a game that speaks about looking into yourself and asking questions, what would happen if if I chose different path in my life? Because long story short, this game is about a guy who lands stranded on a deserted planet, and thanks to technological advancement, he can make alternate versions of himself, but not exact copies, but different ones based on different choices he would theoretically made in the past life. And then in the game, but of course there's a ton of gameplay that speaks about it. It's not, choose A or B in a dialogue line. But my point is, we definitely sit in this area of meaningful entertainment. This is where we feel strong and we want to, keep pushing, definitely. But not everything needs to be as bleak and as depressing as this War of Mine. I think it's like once in a lifetime because, war is also, it's thrilling, but it's also grim. We don't want to create grim things all the time. Like there are different topics as well. Okay, are we good?
Hello. I wanted to ask, or could you maybe clarify? I didn't understand if your game is being taught about as a piece of art that's supposed to be experienced, or is it just a tool to teach something? And if it is taught about as a piece of art, do you think there should be a curriculum about teaching about games as art in schools?
No, mostly it's used as a tool to teach ethics. So the teacher gives the game to the students, let them play, and then asks questions. What did you do? In the game you have, for example, starving people, and you may decide to feed them, but your people are gonna starve, or you may decide to feed your people, and the others who asked you for help would be starving. So the game faces you with very specific moral dilemmas. So it's an ethical experiment. What do you do if a choice you make have a very bad consequences? So it's an ethical experiment, and as such is used. And in schools on lessons of ethics. When it comes to Polish language, it's a different kind of story because in our Polish classes we have a ton of books about Second World War, about people being horribly treated by war, and this War of Mine resonates well within the topic. So it's used as such a tool, not as tool to show that art can be art, if you know what I mean. Did I answer your question?
And do you think there should be space in schools for teaching about games, or do you think that?
Absolutely.
All right, that answers my
Yeah, absolutely, like 100%. This is the last one, okay? Go on.
Firstly, thank you for the great lecture. And I have a little question.
Thank you.
When people make their games, they have like a lot of content which they cut because of time, because of money, because of different stuff. Is this War of Mine have some moral dilemmas that you cut from it because you just can't to do it like in terms or by the budget or something like this. Is it the complex story which you want to say, or is it some situation which you could to add if you have some opportunities?
You know, we always cut stuff, always. I mean, not in terms that there are stuff in our plan that we are not willing to do because of we're not sure how to do it or something, usually because of budget and time, so resources. Every developer is limited in resources, even Rockstar. And at some point you just need to say, stop, feature lock, let's make the polishing and, you know, alpha, beta, release candidate. So there's always stuff that we cut because we don't have more time to develop more and more and more. So, but mostly the reason behind it is time and people. Back in the days, budget as well, but now we're in a different financial situation. But at some point, you just need to say stop, because if you don't say it, you can create bigger game. And first of all, it costs a lot. And secondly, it's like a pregnancy that's, you know, too long held, if you know what I mean. We call it przenoszona ciąża. Like at some point, you need to give a birth to your baby. Otherwise, it may end badly. I mean, maybe it sounds like a bad parallel, but it works in Polish. But my point is, don't be afraid to cut, and at some point say, let's focus on the release. So, Oleg, correct me, but we cut content in every single game because we don't have time, or we decide, like, this feature is not worthy. Let's focus on something that is, you know, the most important one. And by saying this, I'd like to thank you, and I'm told this is it, so thank you very much.